بالقليل من القليل تبلوا بالقليل من القليل
Welcome to the Friday Circle podcast, a collection of Islamic reminders and circles to recharge your iman.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Jazakumullah khair for coming. Mashallah, really big turnout today. So for the next 2 weeks, inshallah, we'll spend three sessions, not particularly long each session, to look at the life of a man called Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih. I hope many of you, if not all of you, have heard this name before, but it's no problem if you haven't, because we're going to, inshallah, explore his life over these sessions. And we're going to focus specifically on a pivotal moment in history. And this is recognized irrespective of the historical source, Islamic or non-Islamic, which was the conquest of Constantinople in 1453. In these sessions, inshallah, we're going to look at what was the Ottoman Empire, briefly. Who was this man? What was special about this man? What was the significance of this particular battle? And what lessons we can learn from him and his traits and his characteristics. To prepare this, I looked at a few sources. So the main source was this book by Dr. Muhammad Ali al-Sallabi. He's the same author who wrote, you've probably seen it in the bookstores, the book on Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, Khalid ibn Walid, sorry. And this is a really nice book, not particularly long, about 200 pages. It flows beautifully, and he extracts lots of lessons from the life of Muhammad al-Fatih. I also listened to a lecture from the Heroes of Islam series, which is a very old series. And if you were to ever find it on YouTube, you'd recognize some familiar voices way back from the 90s. Part of this is from a book by Roger Crowley called Constantinople, The Last Great Siege, which is he's written it as a story, and it's really epic. I didn't finish this book because towards the end it becomes very anti-Islamic, and you find out that this guy doesn't really like Islam, and he wasn't really happy that the Muslims took over. And my most important source is Marvel Comics, and you'll find out where that comes from in just a minute, okay? This is the beginning and the end of this series, essentially, this hadith. But the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Verily you shall conquer Constantinople. What a wonderful leader will her army be, and what a wonderful army will that army be." And this is narrated in Ahmed. This hadith would form the inspiration for a young boy by the name of Muhammad to embark on a journey that would change not only his life, but the life of all of the Muslims of the Ummah. It would change the geographical nature of the world. This one hadith. And it wasn't just Muhammad al-Fatih that was affected by this hadith. This hadith inspired many Muslims to embark on a journey to be the leader that conquered Constantinople. And I want to take a slight step back. And I want you to think about the context in which the Prophet ﷺ said this. Because he said this at a time when, where was Islam at this time? Had it spread beyond the borders of the Arabian Peninsula? No. It was concentrated in Mecca and Medina and the surrounding tribes. Constantinople was the capital of the greatest empire of the world, the Byzantine or the Roman Empire. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying to the companions in the desert, where they've not gone beyond the borders, that one day you will conquer the capital of the greatest empire in the world. And the person who does it, what a great person that will be. And everyone who fights in that army, what a great army that will be. And this inspiration, this hadith, formed that inspiration for Muslims. Something which my daughter's been on me this week, right? I think somewhere she heard the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said that Jannah lies at the feet of your mother. And she keeps saying to me, how can Jannah be at the feet of your mum? Because your feet are stinky, right? So how can Jannah be somewhere where feet stink? And I'll try to explain to her, but I can't. And you know, it made me think, how many hadith do we hear? And they just wash over us. You know, she said it to me about 4 times this week. And at no time did I stop and think, maybe I should go do something for my mum. Maybe I should just give her some service or a hug or a smile. It didn't click with me. Whereas for the companions and those that came after, when they would hear a hadith, it would resonate with them. This meant something to them. Whereas we regurgitate the hadith to each other like we're reading out of a textbook, and it doesn't really move what's inside here. And it's just something that made me reflect. And this is a picture of Constantinople. This is modern day Istanbul. Istanbul is the modern name for Constantinople. This was a city that was built in the year 330, so around 300 years before the Prophet ﷺ. It was built by Greek architects and commissioned by the emperor of the time, Constantine, hence the name. And it's famous because of its location. Who's been to Istanbul? Put your hands up. When you go to Istanbul, what's a key thing for the tourists? What do they say about Istanbul? A key thing about where it sits in the world. Okay, yeah, they call it the bridge between two continents, right? So it sits between Europe and Asia. So that's one thing about it. The second thing about it was when it was commissioned by the emperor, they built it in such a way, because Constantinople is a city, and we'll see a map in just a moment, it has amazing natural defense of sea around the city. And on the one part that's covered by land, they built what was called the Theodosian Wall. The Theodosian Wall was for hundreds of years impenetrable. It was a set of walls, so there was a huge ditch, a lower, a midder, and a lower, an outer, and an inner wall. Okay, so layers of walls, 6 meters thick, and the highest wall was over 12 meters high. So I worked it out, it's over 3 double-decker buses. And that's what they built across the whole stretch of the land. And for that reason, no army was able to penetrate Constantinople until the army of Muhammad al-Fatih came, and we'll see the ingenious way in which he was able to do that. And I mentioned to you, many people had attempted to penetrate this great city. And I'll mention just one of note, which is in the time of Muawiyah, radiallahu anhu, when he was the Khalifa, he laid a 7-year siege on this city, 7 years, and the Muslims could not penetrate the city. It's estimated about 30,000 Muslims lost their lives in that siege. 30,000. All hoping to be part of that army, the great army that would conquer Constantinople. And just another point of interest, there was a companion in that army called Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. Put your hand up if you know why he's important in the seerah. There's a specific thing about him in the seerah, radiallahu anhu. Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. Jazakallah khair. Yeah, so that was the house where the Prophet ﷺ stayed when he first entered Medina. How old was Abu Ayyub al-Ansari when he went on this expedition? Yeah, he was in his 80s. In his 80s, and still remembered that hadith and still wanted to be part of that great army. He didn't make it, by the way. He felt unwell before they actually engaged in battle. And he said to Muawiyah, even so, when I die, take my body and bury it in that city. Bury it at the walls of the city, so that he would know that that's where he died, that's where he spent his last days. So this is a rough picture of what I was trying to tell you earlier. This is Constantinople. You'll see here the natural sea defenses. Okay, the Sea of Marmara, Bosphorus, and the Golden Horn. Okay, and can you see this line over here? That's the wall of Theodosius covering all of that land. Okay, and so we'll see a lot more next week when we break down the battle. When we break down the battle, what was the significance of this, and how did the Muslims attack this city? Because this city the Romans were expert naval forces. They could easily repel people around the coast. This line here was a set of thick steel chains that they had built to stop enemy ships entering what was called the Golden Horn. And we'll see next week how that all unfolded, inshallah. This is the Hagia Sophia. This was a church built in Constantinople, and it was built to highlight the importance of the capital of the Byzantine Empire to the whole world, right? So it was said when Christians would come to Constantinople and they'd see the Hagia Sophia, in that period, there was nothing like it in the world. They just gape at it. You know how, it made me think how when we go to the Haram for the first time in Mecca and you see the Haram in the flesh, you're like awestruck, you stare at it. The descriptions of how Christians would see this building was the same. And when Muhammad al-Fatih conquered Constantinople, this became a masjid. And if you go to Istanbul, this is one of the premier attractions. You can see how they converted it into a masjid. This is the interior of the building. And it really is beautiful. It's a stunning piece of architecture. Right. This is a coin from the British Museum, okay? It's from the 17th century. Okay, so a good few hundred years after Constantinople was conquered. It is from the city of Constantinople, this coin. Islambul. When Muhammad al-Fatih conquered Constantinople, he changed the name to Islambul, okay? But we know it today as what? Istanbul, right? Does anyone know who changed the name? Ataturk, okay? Ataturk was the president of Turkey in the early part of the 20th century. If anyone knows anything about Ataturk, why did he change the name from Islambul to Istanbul? Why?
He was secular, anti-Islam.
Absolutely, okay? Ataturk was a man who was a secularist. He didn't believe in the Khilafah, Sharia. He believed in a nationalist Turkey, which is why he changed the name from Islambul to Istanbul. And you could argue what's in a name. And I would argue there is a lot in a name. Because what happens when a city of this history changes from Islambul to Istanbul? We've lost a piece of our history. Yes? There's a piece of our history that we've lost. So what is the impact? I'm asking you this now as a group. Because we touched upon this when Abdul Hamid was doing his series on the Khilafah in the modern context, right? We spoke about how Muslims see the world, what our history is, our connection to our history. Can we see beyond how we're raised in this country and that we're colonized? All of these things we touched upon, yes? So I'm asking you, what is the impact on Muslims when we start to lose our heritage? When we start to become cut off from our history? What is the impact on Muslims when that happens? Yeah, so you lose that. By losing the name, you've lost that Islamic aspect to it, isn't it? And for the general people, they don't. If it wasn't called Istanbul, you might not even know it was ever an Islamic city. You'll never even think, was this ever conquered by Muslims? Did Muslims ever live there? And Turkey at one point didn't really look like an Islamic country whatsoever. And what Babar says really resonates, because there's something really important in this, okay? That you don't know where you're going as a people unless you look to where you've come from. Yeah, all nations have their traditions, have their history, and they all celebrate it in their own ways. Right? So when Michael Gove was the education secretary, he was annoyed at the curriculum. He said, why do we always talk about Russian history and black history, all these other histories? Why do we focus on English history? Yeah? And the great battles that the British fought, and etc., right? Everyone wants to celebrate, everyone wants to celebrate their own history. And we as Muslims, we have the greatest traditions of them all. Our history is so colored and so varied with conquests, with victories. The golden age of Spain, the house of wisdom in Iraq. Islamic history is nothing but it's like a bowl of fruit. You can pick from it in any century, in any era, and you will connect back to the people we have come from. But if we don't know things like this, that Istanbul was Islambul, how are we ever going to know where to find that bowl or where the fruits are? We'll never know where we came from. And so we'll never know what we can aspire to be. You will always be shackled by what you're taught here. So for example, when I was in Ernest Bevin and we were learning history, we learned Russian history. As a default, we were taught communism is wrong. I remember the teacher telling us, write an essay about all the ways in which communism can never be done in society. Now I look back and think, well, that's just brainwashing, it was programming. We never critically analyzed anything. Because we're being taught at an early age, the place you are in and democracy, this is the pinnacle. This is the pinnacle. And don't ever challenge it or question it. And if you're a socialist or people like Corbyn who want to share wealth and help the poor, they're called lefty loonies and they're given these derogatory titles. That was the famous character from the famous film Black Panther, okay? Based on what we've just said, it's a bit of a stretch, right? I did want to get this in somehow, and this is how I got it in. Based on what we've just said, why do you think I showed this? What was symbolic about this film when it came out? Yeah, what about that though? So yeah, he's black, he's the Black Panther, so what?
No, the actual skin color is black.
The actual... Yeah, he's black, I know that. His skin color is black, but so what? But he's a... Right, so why is that important? Because this film, it made lots of money, it was great reviews, it's a good film, but it was more than that to the whole of the black community of America. This meant so much more. Why? People went to cinema wearing like African clothing, cultural African clothing. Yeah, it was a big deal. Why? Harun? Every race has a place, yep. What else? Why is that important? That's what I'm asking. So who cares? So what? He's a black hero. So what? Why was that important to the black community?
Will be the hero.
Absolutely, right? So black people in America had, and we've seen this, every Hollywood film to date, what role does the black man play typically in a Hollywood film? He's either a gangster, a drug dealer, or he's the comedy sidekick, right? And who is always the hero? What color is Superman? Superman, Spider-Man, white, Batman, white, Captain America, white. So everyone, right? But there's something in this, right? Look, so generations and generations of children grow up and they see that heroes are white and black people are never heroes. Black people are always the sidekick, or they're the lowly, they're the villain, or they're this or that, right? Wakanda, the nation that he's from, is the most advanced nation on earth, yes? Right? What accent, the actor's called Chadwick Boseman, he's American through his own American accent. Why did he speak in an African accent in the film? He said himself in an interview, I told the producers we're all going to speak in African accents because Wakanda's never been colonized. No white people have been in Wakanda. We were never under the white man's rule. So why am I going to speak in an American accent for? We all speak in an African accent. If you watch the film, they wear colorful, florid African clothes. They have piercings, discs, things that African culture has. Right? And they celebrate it in this film. So black people, so many black people, celebrities and the regular public said, this film meant so much to me and my children because they will now grow up knowing, black heroes do exist. Right? Nations look to their heroes. This is a fictional character for the black community. We have, our history is littered with heroes. You can take your pick. And so that's why things like this is very important. So who's this? Who's this? It's an actor who plays Ertugrul. It's not Ertugrul, but yes. It's kind of, in the right light. Put a hat on Hamid, kind of. Bit of a resemblance. Is that... Fished it out from Abdul Hamid from the 90s, yeah? So Ertugrul plays a role in our story. When we're learning about Muhammad al-Fatih and the conquest of Constantinople, yes, we'll learn a little bit about Ertugrul. We'll just touch upon him, actually. We don't know much in history about him and his life, if the truth be told. But just having a series, guys, stay with me. Having a series about this man, young Muslim children watching this, something's changing, isn't it, right? They're inspired. People want to know, what was this all about? What was the Qazi tribe? Who was Ertugrul? What was the Ottoman Empire? And that opens up a brand new field of possibilities, not just for youth, but for adults, right? For us as well. So if we plug back in now into where we want to go. So the Ottoman Empire, this came about the 13th century, okay, 13th century. And there was a tribe, the Qazi tribe, they were a tribe based in Kurdistan. And they had to leave where they were based because there was an enemy that was massacring the Muslim lands. Who was that enemy in the 13th century? The Mongols. Yeah, I think there was a talk here, isn't it, recently about the Mongols. The Mongols, led by Genghis Khan and his brother Hulagu Khan. Guys, don't shout out. If you want to say something, just put your hand up. No problem, inshallah. So, because of the Mongol attacks, the Muslim world is being pillaged, ransacked. In Iraq, which was sort of the premier city of the world, and in Iraq there was the House of Wisdom, Baytul Hikmah, lots of scholars and innovation that existed there. When the Mongols descended on Iraq, it was a bloodbath. The House of Wisdom was destroyed, books were burnt, and people were killed indiscriminately. Okay? This was one of the lowest points in Islamic history. And in that low point, this tribe, led by Suleiman Shah, they moved from where they were in Kurdistan to Anatolia. Anatolia is like the country of Turkey today. They moved to that land. His son Ertugrul became leader of that tribe and he established them in the land. They fought with Seljuk Muslims against the Romans and they were given some land because they won those battles and they settled in that land. And it is with the son of Ertugrul that the Ottoman Caliphate starts, the Uthmani Khilafah, because his son was Uthman I. And between Uthman I and the personality that we're going to learn about, between the two of them, there were 5 more sultans of the Ottoman Empire. So Uthman I is the great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of Muhammad al-Fatih, okay? And there's a link between these two. Okay? So if we want to know about Muhammad al-Fatih and why he conquered Constantinople, why he was this unbelievable personality, it starts with him, his great-great-great-great-grandfather. Because Uthman I was a man of great piety. He loved scholars and he surrounded himself with scholars. And that is a trend that would continue with his son, Aru Khan, his son Bayezid, his son Murad II, and Muhammad al-Fatih. They would all, despite being sultans and despite their province and their land growing and becoming kings, they would surround themselves with scholars, with knowledge. And not yes-men scholars. This is what we learn. Not yes-men scholars. Scholars who would tell them off, who would scold them, who would put them back in line. Uthman I was a man of great bravery, of justice. And in his book, Ali Salabi, we're going to finish up in the next couple of minutes, Ali Salabi makes a beautiful point. He says, when Uthman I was born, this was one of the lowest points in the Muslim Ummah, the time he was born. And he narrates 3 verses from Surah Al-Qasas, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he talks about Fir'aun. And he says, Fir'aun, who was a corrupter on this earth, he took the children of Israel, he divided them, he slaughtered their sons, he kept their women alive, and he oppressed them as slaves. But then Allah said, but we wanted to confer our favor upon them. So we gave them leadership and we established them in the land. And so Ali Salabi says that the true believer is never impatient, waiting for the victory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because this man was born at the lowest point of the ummah. And a few generations down the line, well, in fact, with every generation, they would re-establish Islam on the earth. And when they got to Muhammad al-Fatih, that's when it truly, truly blossomed. And so, we'll finish just to touch upon the early years of Muhammad al-Fatih. I've done this purposely because we had 3 sessions, I didn't see the point in rushing. So next week, inshallah, we'll talk more about the battle. But today I wanted to just set the scene of who these characters were. Muhammad al-Fatih was born in Rajab. The date was the 30th of March. Anyone here born on the 30th of March? I have interest. Now we'll just move on swiftly. So Muhammad al-Fatih was born in Rajab. And from a young age, his father Murad II, also a great sultan, great leader, he was determined that my son is going to be an amazing person, a great person. So they made it so that he had teachers who would teach him from a young age. And very soon, he had mastered 6 languages: Arabic, Turkish, Hebrew, Greek amongst them. Okay? But not just language. He was taught physics, mathematics, warfare. He was taught how to fight in sword combat. He was taught how to ride a horse, and he excelled in this. Okay? And they assigned to him a scholar who was called Ahmed al-Qurani. Ahmed al-Qurani was known as the Abu Hanifa of his period. And Ahmed al-Qurani, who had also been a scholar to his father, he shaped a lot of Sultan Muhammad's thinking about the world. And he pushed him. He says that when I was assigned to be his teacher, I went towards him, and he was playing in the courtyard. And teachers before him had tried to teach Sultan Muhammad, but he'd refused. He goes, I'm playing, I'm busy. He's the prince, so he was going to distract me. So he went up to him and said, you're going to start your lesson now. And Muhammad al-Fatih said, no, I refuse, I'm playing. I'll come back later. And previous teachers just accepted it. So al-Qurani gave him a smack. He goes, no, you're going to learn now. And he goes, that's when Muhammad al-Fatih, no one had ever touched him before. And he's like, okay, well, this guy means business. And his parents had given permission to the sheikh, do whatever you want, make him learn. That was one scholar. The second scholar who greatly affected his thinking was Sheikh Shamsuddin. Sheikh Shamsuddin, while Ahmed al-Qurani focused on the knowledge, Sheikh Shamsuddin focused on the action. He would tell this young man, do you know this hadith of the Prophet? That one day Constantinople will be conquered? And the leader will be great and the army will be great? The Prophet said so. And he inspired this young man. At this point, the Ottomans are in a place called Edirne, which is not far from Constantinople. They're established in the land. The army is growing. So he's showing this young man, can you see what's in front of you? Can you see what you can achieve? And a young Muhammad al-Fatih became inspired. And we will see next week that his entire life became about one thing. I am going to be that leader. I am going to be the leader that conquers Constantinople. And so, at the age of 12, his father Murad abdicated the Khilafah, left the Khilafah and gave it to him. Okay? He did so at a time where Murad, his father, had negotiated treaties with a lot of the Christian leaders around the lands of the Ottomans. And he'd fought a long life in jihad and spreading Islam. And Murad wanted to just spend the last few years of his life just in the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he trusted his son at 12 to become the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. But as soon as the Christians in the provinces heard that a 12-year-old has taken leadership of the Uthmani Khilafah, they reneged on their treaties. And skirmishes started to break out in these lands. So Murad II, his father, came back, took over the leadership again. He pushed back the Christians and he stayed the Sultan until he died, which was 7 years later. And so Muhammad al-Fatih, he became the leader of the Ottoman Empire at the age of 19. This was in 1451. And we will see next week how in just 2 years, from 19, in just 2 years, at the age of 21, in the year 1453, the preparation he would make and the steps that he would take to conquer Constantinople. Inshallah, we'll cover that in a lot more detail next week. سبحانك وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Friday Circle podcast. If you want to enjoy more, visit fridaycircle.co.uk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.